Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Becoming More Me. I'm really excited to introduce you to today's guest, Ginny Priem. I actually had the pleasure of speaking with her on her show, Drinking with Gin, which we'll get into the title, which is nothing like what it sounds like, recently. And she's such a pleasure. She has over 2 decades of leadership experience in the corporate world, and she's super dynamic. She's a captivating motivational speaker and also a #1 best-selling author of You're My Favorite. But she also, she's a podcast host. She has a master certification in life coaching. And in her #1 best-selling book, which she's been kind enough to give us a link so that you can read the first chapter for free, she reveals a lot of her own personal stories. This traumatic end to a romantic relationship that has a really shocking twist. And we're going to talk about that too today, because the man that she was living with in her house turned out not to be who she thought he was at all. And it was just a really harrowing experience that sent her on this path of healing and growth. So we're going to go into that today. We're going to talk about, becoming a public speaker. We're going to talk about healing modalities, and it's going to be a great conversation. So thanks for tuning in. Here we go. Thanks for joining me today, Ginny.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
I'm really excited for this conversation. I love to just start by just getting to know you, who you are, where you come from, where you live, what you like to do with your free time, who you spend your time with, all that kind of personal stuff. Fill us in.
Ooh, okay. So I am a lover of travel.
Mm.
I live in Minneapolis, and people, like, especially in the US, it makes it really easy for me to get anywhere in the US, being so centrally located. You had just mentioned your dog. I'm a huge dog lover. So I have a 5.5-year-old perfect ruby color Cavalier King Charles Spaniel named Francine,
Oh,
right here next to me. So huge dog lover. She also is a traveler. She has been on 20 flights.
wow.
She's been to like, oh gosh, 6 or 7 states, maybe more. I don't know. She's going to Florida for her first time next week. Yeah, so love to travel. Um, who I like to spend my time with? That's a really great question. That has shifted as I have become more me, since that's the topic that we are on today. I used to be surrounded by a lot of toxic, destructive, unhealthy relationships and people. And so I've done a lot of what I call cleaning up my community over the past 5 years. And now the people that I surround myself with are warm, authentic, genuine, vulnerable, kind people. So it's really been a beautiful transformation as I've evolved. So have the people around me and their deep, meaningful connections and relationships. And in fact, I was joking the other day that sometimes I tend to be a planner. So I reach out to people all the time. And every once in a while, I'll like get into my own head and be like, I'm not reaching out to anyone. I hate being the person that's always the planner. And then like all of a sudden within a 2-day time period, all of these wonderful people in my life like reach out and they're like, hey, we want to get together for dinner, lunch, coffee. And so my social calendar has been insane the past couple of weeks. So I even have a happy hour today. And then tomorrow night I have tomorrow Friday is like a no plan Friday. And I'm really excited about it. That
That's
was a long answer, probably a
Oh,
little more
perfect.
than you bargained for, but that's a little bit about me.
I love that. And so you're going to happy hour today, and you have a podcast called Drinking with Gin, right?
Yes, I
And
do.
so, how did that evolve? How did the name of your podcast? I was lucky enough to be a guest on there. It's a great show. How did that evolve to be Drinking with Gin?
Oh, so this was a little bit of a hippy dippy woo woo story.
I love hippy dippy woo woo.
Okay, I don't get to share this very often on other people's podcasts, so thank you for asking. It's a really special story. So my dad, and the timing is very interesting. It's right now it's around Valentine's Day, and my dad was my guy. Like my dad is who shaped me. He and I were inseparable. Like from the time I was born, we just like I joked at his funeral. So he passed away on Valentine's Day. It'll be 3 years ago
Mm.
this year, next week. So we always joked like I was daddy's princess, the apple of his eye, daddy's little girl. And like, there was kind of this ongoing joke in the family. And all of that was true. Like I was his favorite. There's like, and he would even admit it. So, right after he passed away, about a month after he passed away, I had never met with like a psychic or a medium or anything like that. And one of my friends had told me about this guide that she works with. She doesn't call herself a psychic, a medium, anything like that. But this was in 2021. So it was still like people weren't traveling or really going places. It was still pretty early in the pandemic. So I met with her virtually. I was just looking to hang on and have like one more connection with my dad because it was really sudden. Losing him, he passed away of a heart attack on Valentine's Day. And he would say, "Oh, that's so cliche, isn't it?"
Oh,
Um, but just having this conversation. So I was still working in corporate and I asked this guide, Barb, about my career. And I said, where do I said, this is what I do now. And I
and
hadn't
what
even
did you
come.
do in corporate?
So I was in corporate, gosh, for over 2 decades. So for almost two of those decades, I was in medical aesthetics. So I worked for different skincare companies, in leadership positions, education, leadership, facial injectables, and yeah, so that was the majority of what I spent my entire career doing. And she
Amazing.
said,
So you asked Barb.
yeah, Barb. Okay, so Barb is amazing. I always say to people, I'm like, I don't know what you believe in, like if you're religious or spiritual, like, but I believe in Barb. Like, I believe in Barb. I've met with her 3 times now, and everything she has said has been eerily accurate. So I asked Barb about my career, and she said, your career is going to take a major turn. Like you're going in a completely different direction. I see you speaking on stages all over the world. I even see almost like a talk show. And because I'm such a skeptic, I circled back to that at the end of my session with Barb. I said, okay, Barb, then what's this talk show called? And she never really like makes eye contact with you or speaks to you or like makes eye contact and speaks like directly to your face.
It's
She's
kind of
kind of
like
like,
she's channeling.
yeah, she's channeling, she's kind of like looking and towards the sky and whatever. And she's looking up in this corner and she starts laughing hysterically, like someone just told her the funniest joke that she ever heard. And she goes, so I have a question for you. Was your dad funny? And I was like, well, where do you think I got it from? And she said, because according to him, your talk show is called Drinking with Gin.
I love that.
So that's what I named my podcast. The play on words. It's not even about drinking at all. I'm Gin.
Right.
It's personal growth chats over drinks of any kind. And so the name came from my dad through Barb.
That's so
And
cool. I love
yeah,
that.
that's
I'm
where the
so
name
glad
came
I
from.
asked.
Yeah, it's sort of a fun story.
It's a great story. Do you share that on your show at any point? Like, did you open your
I,
episodes with it?
yeah, I have. And I might have actually, I'm trying to remember. I think I shared it. I did a Valentine's Day kind of tribute episode to my dad last year, and I think I shared it in that one. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So you've had this like remarkable journey from corporate to becoming like a number one best-selling author and master certified life coach, and you are speaking on those stages that Barb said you would be speaking on. So what inspired you to make that transition other than Barb saying it would be so?
Well, interestingly enough, in another session, Barb, so then I met with her later that year in person, and two of my friends were in the room. And I had kind of gotten discouraged. I had put my book on a proverbial shelf. So this is kind of a twofold, like a two-part story. I started writing my book, my first book, my number one bestseller, You're My Favorite, in the beginning of 2019. And in November of 2019, I ended up going on this meditation retreat, even though I had never meditated for a single second before in my life. I went on a week-long trip to Mexico in another country for a meditation retreat. I guess I go all in, right?
I do the
So
same thing.
on that retreat, we were tasked with writing intentions. And one of my intentions, even though the meditation guide on that retreat told me that writing a book and this journey was not my path, I got a little discouraged. So I kind of put my book on the proverbial shelf for a while. Um, but despite that, one of my intentions I wrote was, so I think this is sometimes like our souls sometimes know things before our brains can catch up.
For sure.
So November of 2019, I hadn't written a book yet. I wasn't, I had been speaking in my corporate job for like 15 years. But one of my intentions, I still say it every day, is I am a best-selling published author and internationally renowned speaker, positively impacting and empowering others.
I love it.
So that just kind of sat out there for a while. And then fast forward to August of 2021, and I met with Barb. She said, there's something that you keep circling back to that you haven't finished, and you need to finish it in order to move your life forward, because your purpose in this world is to help people heal and share their stories. My two friends that were in the room looked at each other and they looked at me and they're like, Ginny, it's the book. You have to finish the book. Like, that's what this is. And literally, I met with my publisher the next week. We put together a 6-month plan to finish and publish the book. And that was really the catalyst that started everything.
Oh, that's so cool. That's amazing. So how did like that transition like change, I don't know, like your approach to like personal growth and leadership and all of that, like transitioning from the one to the other?
Yeah, it really all started with the story of what happened. I share all the juicy details in You're My Favorite. So, You're My Favorite is the details of what happened, the story, the trauma that changed my life. And it's about a romantic relationship. Uh, Turns out that the man that was living in my house was not who I thought he was at all. But by starting on my own trauma recovery journey, that's sort of where I began to understand and learn about my own CPTSD, coming from a narcissistic family. And sometimes when you have this sort of PTSD, you don't realize it's happening because it becomes so familiar, right? And so what I realized was I was picking a lot of these types of people with these abusive, destructive behaviors and, toxic personalities to be the closest people in my life.
Yeah,
So I started making these big shifts, and a lot of that comes with self-discovery.
sure.
When you are a child of a narcissistic parent, you don't get to be your authentic self.
And I'm
And
assuming that was your mother, not your father.
correct. Yeah. Yeah. And so you don't really get to be your authentic self. So I went on this huge self-discovery journey, and you can't really love yourself until you know yourself.
Right.
And that was kind of how I moved through life, was not really knowing who I was until just, a handful of years ago, which has been a really rewarding journey. And so that was when my first book came out. And then in the meantime, while I was still working in corporate, I started building all of the components of my business. I started to see the writing on the wall with the company that I was with, that things weren't going quite as I think they had hoped.
Yeah.
But it all works out exactly how it's supposed to. So in the meantime, I hired my business coach, I hired my speaking coach, I built everything. I started the podcast, I published the book, even still while I was in corporate, in anticipation of building everything, so that when that time came, I already had the runway was ready for takeoff.
A smooth transition as much as that
Yeah,
can be.
exactly.
So what inspired you to share all those like personal details that you share in You're My Favorite? What were you hoping to like that readers would gain from reading that story?
So it really it's so the another twofold answer to your question. It really started out as like a cautionary tale in hopes to help others. But when it turned into less about like the love and the loss story and became more about the learning, I wanted to be able to help people like when I developed my coaching model, have sort of this easy to follow step or guide, for your path forward that people could use that I knew works. I used it for myself. I pulled it apart. I put it back together in knowing that this works not just for me, but also holds true for other people. So to make this journey, this path, your path forward a little bit easier for other people and not have to try to figure it out on their own. But what inspired me to share all the juicy details in You're My Favorite was one day I was shopping in a boutique that I used to shop at and spend a lot of money at. It was just like a couple of months after my life imploded. And these girls that work there were gossiping about my story and not even accurately. So I left there that day going, gosh, is my story that interesting that other people are gossiping and talking about it and they want to hear about it? They want to talk about it. Maybe I should share it. Oh, and then maybe I should share it accurately. And that was kind of what sparked me to be like, to start putting, pen to paper and start actually writing the story. And then, like I said, it kind of started out as like this cautionary tale. I had no idea how many women and people it would help that were also victims of the real life Chad. That's not his name, so I say the real life Chad. In the book, like countless women have reached out to me at this point. But being able to use it on a bigger scale, what I've realized through speaking and the podcast that our stories and what we've gone through, our challenges, our difficulties, our traumas, our situations, that's what connects us.
Yeah.
And they're all so much more similar than they are different.
Absolutely. Was your story one of the real life Chad taking on an identity that was not his own?
Yes.
Okay. And it had impact throughout the community where you lived.
Yes. So about a year later, he was about a year after my book came out. So right away, women started reaching out to me very slow, like a few a month probably, which is kind of a lot.
Yeah.
Then about a year after my book was released, the first book, You're My Favorite, a picture of him was posted in this private Facebook group. And all of a sudden, I had this huge influx of followers, messages. Apparently, people started sharing my book with one another, talking to one another, going, oh, yeah, I'm also a victim of him. Oh, I also had this experience. One woman had been dating him on and off for 8.5 years, the whole time while he was living in my house.
Wow.
Uh, it was just fascinating. So at this point, countless women have reached out and have shared how me opening up and sharing what I went through helped them on their own, healing journeys, which is a beautiful thing.
That is absolutely. The ripple effect is awesome. So, was it only after you went through that whole experience that you kind of like opened up all the stuff with the CPTSD from earlier in your life?
Yes. Yeah. A lot of it really started on that meditation retreat. We did some inner child work. And I think that's when I really started to begin to understand things like gaslighting and triangulation and narcissism. And now those topics, and I'm very passionate about bringing awareness to these topics in a very educational way. So that's why, like, when you came on Drinking with Jen, we talked about, well, what was your trauma, right? Like, what was it that kind of sparked things for you? Because again, that's kind of that common thread of what connects us, but then taking it to a deep understanding. Because I know a lot of these words are thrown around really flippantly. So I bring on inspiring guests like you that help people, share through your own experiences and journeys, but then also through the work that you do. I bring in a lot of experts, inspirational people, psychotherapists, psychologists to really do a deep dive in understanding on these topics and raise awareness.
Yeah. So at this point, you're doing mainly speaking, or do you still do coaching?
I will do coaching. I've actually had a huge influx recently of people inquiring about doing coaching packages. So I will do it. The main thing that I do is speaking. But if I step off of the stage and people are like, man, you really inspired me, that's the number one word that people use after I speak is I was inspired, it was inspiring, it was inspirational. Then I certainly want to connect with people and help continue that conversation. So the core of everything I do is speaking, and then I have my books, my coaching, and the podcasts that all kind of support each other, really.
Yeah. So, and after you published You're My Favorite, you created a second book, kind of a journal, I think. I'm My Favorite, a guided journal for your path forward. And this somehow works together with the speaking that you do. Can you explain how that all works and what you believe this unique journal aids in like personal development and things?
Yeah, so You're My Favorite is the juicy story. That's what happened. And then I'm My Favorite, like you said, is a guided journal. And it is, and I always feel like I used to feel really weird saying this, even though it just came out a few months ago. It just came out, yeah, like 3 months ago. So it's brand new, hot off the press, but it is beautiful. Like it is stunning. And I feel like I can say that and not sound cocky because I
Sure.
didn't illustrate it. But my illustrator is so talented. She's such a talented artist. So it is filled with beautiful artwork, inspirational quotes, worksheets, journal prompts, exercises, and it incorporates my coaching model. So it's kind of identifying your path forward. And then there's a full year. So I give context and I share, pieces of my own story of how I use the different components in it. And then in the back, you have a full additional 12 months of all of the worksheets, exercises, journal prompts. So yeah, it gives you 13 months of content and material. And most of my speaking clients do purchase copies for their audience because it really helps continue the conversation of what I speak about on stage. And then you can kind of take that and use it in real life application.
That's really smart. Really
Yeah.
smart. How did
Thanks.
you pivot into speaking? Like what was your process for, getting on those stages and making that your thing that you enjoy doing the most and do the most of?
Yeah, it is. So I did a lot of speaking, a lot of presenting in front of people for many years in corporate.
Sure.
So for 4 years, one of my roles was a educator. So I traveled all around. I would leave my house on Monday, go to point A. I would teach in front of hundreds of people for 8 hours on Tuesday, go to point B on Wednesday, do the same thing Thursday, and then go home. So I got very accustomed to public speaking and presenting and talking and educating in front of groups for 15 years. So I always knew that speaking is the number one fear behind death. So I knew I wasn't afraid of it. I knew I had a message and a story, and that it's a way that I really connect with people. And so then how I transitioned outside of corporate was I hired a speaking coach to make sure that I could develop the right, building my content into the right format to deliver impactful keynotes. I put one together myself initially, and it
Mhm.
was good, but I always attribute this, like I used to be embarrassed to be like, oh, like if I tell people that I have a coach, will they think that I'm not very good? But I'm like, Olympic athletes, the best of the best have coaches, right? Professional athletes, they have coaches. The
Even
best
coaches have coaches.
Exactly. And we should, because
Yeah.
that keeps you relevant. It keeps you fresh. It really helps you up your game. So in working with her, we spent months and months developing and creating and crafting my content to get it stage ready. And then I started, booking gigs and, promoting myself, started working with speaker bureaus, which can be really beneficial. And then even just utilizing my own network, like, with I just delivered a keynote for a big national sales meeting for an aesthetics company that I used to work for. And so it was a really fun full circle moment to be back on stage, but this time inspiring and empowering them to go, set up their 2024.
Absolutely. That's really cool. So, for listeners who might be going through some of their own paths of healing and growth right now, what kind of advice would you give them to help them to become more of who they want to be in this world?
So I always say, start with yourself. Everything starts with yourself, and it's not about being selfish. You have to get to know you and you have to spend time with yourself, which can be really uncomfortable for a lot of people. I'm an introvert. I love alone time. Like, I love being by myself with myself, but I know that's not comfortable for everybody. But it's really important to do that so that you get to know. And I feel like you and I may have talked about this on my podcast or
We
maybe
were
off.
talking about the whole party of one thing going out to get.
Party of one. Yes, like go out to eat by yourself. Go take yourself out to coffee, to lunch, whatever feels accessible. And then if you can, build up to going on vacation by yourself. Try different things and figure out what you like and figure out who you are, not what you are, right? Like, not identifying your labels as a mom or a wife or a, manager,
Author or a speaker or whatever else. Yeah.
whatever your job is. Like, tapping into who you are as a person. And I think that piece is really critical. Like, and because I think I said it earlier, in order to love yourself, you have to know yourself. You have to know what you like and start to create boundaries of what you're willing to participate in and not participate in. But yeah, it all starts with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the examples of, going out a little bit by yourself or whatever, because I think so often we can say, yeah, know yourself, but like, how do I do that? Like, how do I start that process and begin down that road? I know for me, it's always people that are like, I really want to do the work, but I have no idea what the work is or, you
Yeah.
know, how to get from point A to point B. Everybody says to do it, but like, what is it? So that's
Mhm.
really helpful. Um, what's the best place that people can like learn more about you and what you do?
So I like to keep things really simple. All of my social media, website, everything is just my name,
Yep.
Ginny Priem. So if you want to book me for speaking, look at the podcast, any of my content, ginnypriem.com. You can purchase my books there. They're also on Amazon. I hang out most from a social media perspective over on Instagram, which again, my handle is Ginny Priem.
Surprise.
So, yeah, just keeping everything really simple. But yeah, like coaching, books, speaking, all of that is, and the podcast even is on my website.
Very cool. What was I mean, I know you took a big break in the middle there, but what was the writing process like for you? I know, and I asked this question because in my book, unexpectedly so, it wasn't what I planned to write about, but I ended up writing a lot about my writing process because there was so much healing and transformation and things showing up as I wrote. So what was that process like for you? And did that help with your healing?
Mm. I know a lot of people say like writing is so cathartic, and I think it can be for a lot of people. I think by the time my book came out, I had done so much healing. It certainly evolved. Like, I think originally when I started writing You're My Favorite, it started almost like a memoir-y kind of. So it's like, why are people going to care, right? Like, they have to understand who I am in order to be invested and to care in this story. So originally I was going to do it was kind of a little bit more memoir-y. But
Okay.
over time it shifted and it really kind of reads like a novel, like a juicy novel. But oh, by the way, that was my life.
How much
So
time passed from when your world imploded, as you said, to when you began writing and then to when you finished?
yeah, so my world imploded in November 2018, and then I started writing in the spring of 2019. So just a few months.
Okay.
And then I wrote for about, 6, 8 months, and then kind of put it on the shelf for about a year and a half. Picked it back up and then published it. So it was a little over 3 years total of the process. And what's interesting, I do think that putting it down for a while was really helpful for me, just from a perspective standpoint, because when I picked it back up and I started reading some of the early content, I was like, ooh, she was angry. And that's
And you
okay.
probably were.
I was, but that wasn't when I picked back up the book and got it ready for publication and putting it out into the world. That's not where I was.
Yeah.
And that's not what I wanted to present to the world, right? So that was, I think, a really healthy shift in perspective to be able to look at that and see sort of the evolved journey or the evolved path that I had been walking over that little over 3 years. So it was, really turned into turning it. It's kind of one part love story,
Mm-hmm.
and then one part of the loss and the learning. And like I said, it kind of really ends in a self-love story.
Yeah, I love that. All the full circle things in there. What are the common challenges or things that you see in the women that are attracted to the work that you do?
I feel like I work most often with women that are going through transition, transformation. Maybe they've had a big change, or they're looking to make a big change, and they kind of don't know how or where to start.
Sure.
Uh, and I should just say people in general. I tend to work more with women, but I love when men come up to me too. Like one of my biggest supporters and you know people that's been with me on this journey is a man. He's like, Ginny, we like to grow and evolve too. Don't count us out. And I had some men come up to me last week after my keynote, and they were so complimentary. They're like, oh my gosh, you have no idea how, like, what a gift that was to hear you talk. I've been struggling with anxiety, and the things you talked about, he's like, I was taking notes, and I just know how much this is going to
Yeah.
help me. So it's dealing with difficult, challenging times, transformation, transition, maybe not knowing where or how to start, or thinking about making a big change, and it's really scary. They're kind of operating out of that fear-based mentality and want help moving from those lower vibrating, emotions of like fear, shame, guilt, and then moving to a different place. And that's what I can help people do.
Absolutely. And you're amazing at it. So, thank you so much for everything that you've been sharing with us today. I love this conversation. Is there anything that you'd like to add as a final touch as we kind of wrap this up?
Ooh, since we talked about my dad a little bit today, I think this will be kind of a fun way to wrap it up. My dad had what I call dadisms, not to be confused with a dad joke, although they're both poorly timed and well intended. Dadisms they were not supposed to be funny. They were supposed to be little life lessons. And one of his favorites, which was his most annoying, his most popular, but most annoying, because as a kid, I was like, what does that even mean? But he would always say, Ginny, you are the architect of your own destiny.
Mhm.
And now how I apply that in life, it's actually it's the last quote in I'm My Favorite, with a beautiful illustration. We can't always control what happens, but we can control how we respond.
Ugh, I love that. And I also have chills. That is something that I weave into a lot of my hypnotic transformations, that very saying. So that feels just very like synchronistic and the perfect way to end this lovely time talking with you today. So thank you to all of you who have listened. I know everyone has a choice in what we listen to with podcasts. There's millions of them out there. So thank you for choosing to listen to Becoming More Me today. And Ginny, thank you so much for being here and sharing everything with us today.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thanks Thanks for spending some of your precious time with me today. If you loved this episode, please leave a review or simply share it with someone else who would get great benefit from it too. If you share on social media, please tag me so I can personally connect and thank you. Until next time, keep taking bold and brave steps towards becoming more of who you want to be in this world. You are capable, you are worthy, and you are enough. And if your inner critic is still trying to argue with those facts, hit me up. We've got work to do.